I'm Brian Wozlowski. I'm from the Center for Democracy and Technology. I'm the Chief of Staff here, and I get the privilege of welcoming our two guests here, our President, Nuala O'Connor, and the ICANN Board Chair, Cherine Chalaby. We're excited to have you here for this conversation. I was thrilled when our friends at ICANN reached out to us and asked us if we could host it. As many of you know, ICANN is naming and numbering, but they got a little bit famous for a stretch there when the internet was given away to them. Of course, that's not true. It's been a year. I think the internet's running just fine. Although we did have a smidge of news about that today that we're just not going to go into right now, so because I don't want to repeat those phrases. But we're really excited because this is a chance to talk about the future of ICANN, the role they're going to play. CDT has long been engaged in internet governance issues and making sure that human rights and civil society has a voice there. So it's great to see so many civil society groups here today to talk about the future. As you can see, I'm going to turn it over to our guests shortly. I do want to remind everyone we have a reception afterwards, so we hope you can stick around. We have wine and beer and cheese and some lovely pastries. Cherine's going to tell you a bit about himself, so I'm going to keep the intro short. He's been with the board, the ICANN board since 2010 and recently became the chair. He's a very accomplished businessman, having served as a senior partner at Accenture and has since moved on to a Middle East-based investment bank, Rasmala. And also has a very impressive degree from the Imperial College of London in computing science, which no doubt helps you in your role. And then, of course, Nuala O'Connor, who I get to call my boss and mentor. She has been the president and CEO of CDT for almost 4 years now. Is that right? Unbelievable. And she challenges us each day to think about how technology affects the individual and the role that technology is playing in strengthening democracies worldwide, in some cases maybe threatening a little bit, and it's a great charge. So without further ado, Cherine and Nuala.
Well, I have the easiest role here because I'm basically going to turn over the mic to Cherine and just first want to say thank you so much for being here and welcome to the Center for Democracy and Technology. We still believe in democracy here at the CDT, and we are staunch allies and fans of your work and our friend Chris Mondini and the whole team in the DC office. And really, I know you've actually got answers to my first 3 questions, so without further ado, take it away.
Okay, thank you, Nuala, and thank you for this kind introduction. This is my first visit to DC as chair of ICANN, and I'm really looking forward to a very robust discussion with all of you on any issue you would want to discuss later on. But given that I am kind of a new entity to many of you, I thought I'll start a little bit, more than a minute or two, give you a bit of background. Some of it was discussed, but get to know me a little bit more. So I grew up in Egypt, and there I went to the Jesuit school for 12 years, the French Jesuit. They were very tough, I have to admit to you. And from there I took a bachelor degree in electrical engineering. And then I went to the UK, and I've been living there since then, and I graduated from Imperial College. I got a master's degree in computing sciences. And then I joined Accenture, and I stayed with them 28 years. After that, I became chairman of an investment bank in the Middle East, and in 2010, I joined ICANN. So in that period from 2010 until now, I held several roles on the board. I was chair of the finance committee for about 4 or 5 years. I was chair of the new GTLD committee that was overseeing the launch of the last round of new GTLDs, and I was also chair of the Ethics and Conflict Committee. I was member of the Board Governance Committee for 7 years, and prior to becoming the chair of ICANN, I was the vice chair for a couple of years. I give you this background a little bit, partly for you to get to know me, but also because it gives you some context around the answers to 3 questions that I discussed with Nuala that I usually, people ask me when they meet me for the first time. And the first question is, what would you do differently to Steve Crocker? So that's number 1, a tough question. The second one is, well, Steve and his predecessors and others are titans of the internet. What skills do you bring? And the third one is, what are your priorities for the board? So let me take each one of those in turn. So what would I do differently to Steve? And even though it's a tough question, I think the answer is very straightforward. And I say it's evolution and not revolution. Let me explain that. For 2 or 3 years before becoming the chair, I worked very closely with Steve. And as a vice chair, he delegated a lot of his responsibilities to me in terms of the working of the boards. And together, we initiated a lot of programs to improve the board effectiveness, efficiency, and transparency. And therefore, today, I see my role is continuing on that path and continue with the evolution of the board and the improvement of the board itself. So you probably have seen, because of that the transition from Steve to myself was really smooth and frictionless. And in fact, that's what the community expect a stable leadership. The last thing you want is a leadership that rocks the boat and that you feel uncomfortable and don't know where we're going. So it has been a stable, and that's why I said it's an evolution rather than a revolution. Okay, in terms of skills, yes, I had a technical background, but I am not, and I'm going to steal a phrase from Becky, I don't come from the long line of distinguished masters of the internet universe. Those people were needed in the early days to give ICANN its legitimacy. But today ICANN is in a different space, right? We're no longer a startup. We have 20 years as an organization. We have 400 employees. We have a budget of about 135 million. We have presence in many locations. And thanks to your work, all of you, through the transition, ICANN has now become an independent company, organization, with new bylaws, with a new redress and appeal mechanism, with new powers given to the community. So ICANN has evolved. And accordingly, the board leadership must evolve with ICANN. And I feel that in terms of skills, that my experience on the board over the last 7 years, particularly all these committees that I mentioned to you, my work with the community, particularly also during the transition, and my prior experience of board governance. I've been on 7 boards before joining ICANN, financial management and strategic planning. So all of those skills together, I think, have prepared me well for the role and the responsibilities I'm now assuming. So that's what I bring in terms of skills. So the third question that Nuala's asking, so what are my priorities as a chair, particularly for the board per se? Well, there is an overarching priority. And the overarching priority is to work with the board and the community to support our mission, right? And to be the steward of that mission, which is the stable and secure operation of the unique identifier. That is our raison d'etre, and that is the overarching priority that dictates almost everything we do. Okay. In terms of the board itself, my colleagues and I have discussed this, and we have an aspiration as a board. The aspiration is to become the trusted and reliable partner to the community. Trusted and reliable partner to the community. What does this mean in practice? Well, it means many things, but there are 6 that come to mind at the top of the things we need to do. The first thing is we need to ensure that the board priorities are aligned with the community's priorities. There is no point the board going in one direction and the community going in another direction. Has been the case sometime in the past, and we know that broke the trust between the board and the community. The second thing we need to do is the board needs to be consistent in the execution of its responsibilities. You, the community, you, the businesses, you, the civil society, everybody, you want to expect predictability from the board. You want consistency. You want our decisions to be supported by rationale that you accept and understand, right? And you want that level of consistency from us. And we should strive at providing that, so that when we make one decision based on certain rationale and make a similar decision 6 months or 9 months later, it should be based on a similar rationale and not something completely different. So that's the second thing we need to do. The third thing is very important, is we need to provide the community with the appropriate level of leadership. You don't want a rubber stamp board. at the same time, you do not want an autocratic board that all the time intervenes and inserts itself and does not respect the multi-stakeholder model, nor the consensus building or the policy, the way we do policies. We respect all of that. But we also sometimes are in a unique position where we can see the broader picture more than one individual constituency. And our role is obviously to have some courage to make thoughtful decisions, to provide guidance when it's needed, to provide opinions when it's needed, and to clarify any impasses if there are impasses out there. So that is what I call the responsible and appropriate leadership while respecting the policy development process and the multi-stakeholder model. The fourth thing we need to do is we have an oversight responsibility over ICANN.org. And it is very important that we ensure that ICANN.org is compliance with appropriate laws at all times. Okay? That is essential for us as an organization. And then there are two more things we need to do. One is we need to engage with the community. We need to be out there talking, exchanging ideas, be part of the community, listen carefully to your priorities, to your concern, and try and act on those and be responsive. The bylaws, as we all know, went from 50 pages long to 250 pages. They are complex. We haven't implemented every part of the bylaw. And as we implement some parts of it, we will discover there are some processes that are missing. That will create some tension. That will create a difference of opinion. But it's the way we handle that difference of opinion is the way that's going to define our relationship with the community. And it has to be a cooperative way, a way that engenders trust more than anything else. We are on the same side, and that is a very important thing for us to remember. And then finally, the last thing we need to do is to ensure that we as a board act in the collective interest of all stakeholders and not the single interest of a single stakeholder. We must remain independent in our thinking. So people say, well, we come from different parts of the community, we have to protect their interests. And I say, not exactly the way you put it, because the bylaw says when you're on the board, you have to serve the interests of the entire organization. The law says we have to do that. But don't forget that when you come from different parts of the community, you bring with you experience, you bring with you a perspective that is so needed to enrich the decision we make. So it isn't a decision which is very narrow, but it's a broad decision based on input from different parts of the community. So if we did all of this, and this is a challenge, I do believe that the community will trust us, and I do believe that the community will believe we are a reliable partner. Is it going to be easy? No, there are many challenges ahead. But personally, I'm very confident. I'm very confident because I look at the board members and I can only see an abundance of talent on the board. We have a stellar group of leaders. We are also supported by a top-class CEO. And my role as a chair is just to harness all of that in order to meet the challenges ahead. So I do look into the future with a lot of hope and a lot of enthusiasm. So those are the three questions. But before I hand over to you, I want to say something about the civil society, your group. First of all, I do recognize, and we all recognize, how crucial your role is in the workings of the multi-stakeholder model, right? You are a defender of individual and human rights. You gather support, you advocate for policy position, and you remind us of all times that we need to focus on the impact of what we do on our decision and policies on individuals. And thanks to your work, and thanks to the voices that you have expressed, three things have taken place. During the transition, the bylaws got expanded and clarified to include commitments to respecting human rights. Second thing that happened because of you and because of your work is in work stream 2 of the accountability work, a lot of effort has been put in developing a framework of interpretation of how to take these commitments into something to the next level. And then finally, I'm told that the ICANN.org will also undertake, after work stream 2 is finished, a human rights impact assessment on their own internal operation. So thank you so much for your contribution, for your voice. I have a plea. We need your input on two things, right? One is the FY19 budget, which has been posted. You have seen Joran's blog. I've put a blog that funding is stabilizing, and we have to make important decisions. So your input is really required and will be very helpful. And the second one is the GDPR. I'm sure some of you have today also met with our CEO on Adobe and discussed the models that were put forward. And we're looking again for your input. Because without your input, it's very hard to move forward. And we need to find a solution, a hybrid solution that brings us all together and coalesce around a model that works for us. So with that in mind, I want to thank you. And now I'm going to keep quiet and listen to you and hear about your concerns and priority. And hopefully we have a robust discussion. There are 3 board members with me today, Becky, Sarah, and Ron. They're here. We will try and answer every one of your questions. If we can't, then we will take note of that and we will come back to you. We also have our members of our office, led by Duncan here from Washington, here with us, so they can help as well if needed. All right? Thank you.
Well, that was wonderful. Thank you for that great opening. And I know that was actually question number 4, was the role of civil society. So he's been reading off of my notes. But you apparently didn't get to number 5, which is really the broad-ranging question. That's kind of the existential question about ICANN. There are some in the community who have begged for ICANN to take a louder stance on some of the human rights issues facing the internet. There are many who want ICANN to stick to its knitting and be the traditional technical body that it is. What are your thoughts on scope going forward, and how do you address those varying constituencies?
It's a very good question. I think the answer to this is clear. The bylaws have defined our mission and have put us really in a very clear box that our role is to perform a technical function, and that is the administration of the DNS and ensuring the secure and stable operation of the unique identifiers. We are not going to go outside that box. That's not our intent. Our intent is to stay in it. And anyway, this is going to be a community decision if ever you wanted us to do something different. But our remit is to stay within that and not to do something else. Having said that, there are issues like human rights, which are important, that we need to understand and respect the commitment to human rights. There are issues of diversity, which we need to continue to promote so that diversity is happening everywhere across the community and ICANN at all levels. So these are very important. We support our multi-stakeholder model, so that is a model that we have to support and strongly make sure that it evolves with time, that it's open and it's robust, because that's probably the best safeguard that we have for our existence, if you see what I mean.
Yes, in fact that segues into my next question, which is tell us more about your commitment to the multi-stakeholder model, and are there things you might want to do differently, or ways, are there groups that have not been included, or voices that you have not heard from that you would like to going forward?
Okay. So I gave a speech at London School of Economics about a year ago on the multi-stakeholder model and its evolution. And I had to think hard about how to define it and how to explain it. So I'm going to use the same logic, and I'm sure you might disagree with some of it, but I am convinced this is my own interpretation of the multi-stakeholder model. So ICANN has used this model for about 20 years now. And there are different versions of this model that are used by other organizations as well. But our version of the multi-stakeholder model, I can define it as a collaborative network of people who come together from different geography, different functions, and from all over the world on a voluntary basis to participate together in resolving policies, in resolving solutions in the common public interest within the ICANN mission. It is like a virtual shared space. It has no borders. It has no single actor that has control. It hasn't got a single kill switch. it doesn't have a single point of failure. And there isn't a power broker. It's truly an egalitarian system where everybody participates together. And to me, that is, the system kind of protects itself, safeguards itself. What we need to do is to continue to protect it, is to expand it around the world and attract more people into our policy development. We don't want to stay narrow with just the group that we have today that is used to developing. We need to attract as many more people from around the world into the model so that it continues to evolve and continues to expand. The other thing is that model has been enshrined into our bylaws. That's the other safeguard of the model. And that took place during the transition, where the community, for a good part of 2 years, every part of the model has been enshrined in the bylaws, from how we build policies, what decisions we make, what redress mechanism the community has against the board, how advice received from the GAG or advisory committee should be handled. What are the powers that the community is sharing with the board? All of those, I think, were fantastic changes. People were afraid in the beginning, right? Some board members, and some were concerned. Oh my God, the community can get rid of me, can get rid of the whole board. Remember, Steve, everybody, this discussion was a very emotional discussion. But as it turned out, it was the best thing we ever done. Why? Because today it made the board be on the same side as the community. Because, frankly, without both of our agreement, nothing happens. Both of our agreement is needed. I'll take an example, the budget, right? What is the point of the board working with the community for a period of 6 months, developing a budget for the budget to be vetoed after this? And when the budget is vetoed, frankly, we're all shooting ourselves in the foot, right? It is a good power to have. And, of course, it will force us to do things better. But we need to avoid these things. We need to work together to avoid any of these powers to be invoked, to the extent it's possible. So I am very, very bullish about the multi-stakeholder model, particularly our version of it, and I can see it continuing to flourish and expand and attract more people into it.
And who are those people? Who's missing from the dialogue now?
So we know that civil societies have made their voice heard in the past, in the recent past. That has to continue and has to continue big time. There are also developing countries, right, who are really not present at our table. And it is our responsibility to reach out to them and make sure that we help with capacity building, we outreach. Let me give you an example on this particular issue. Last year I attended 2 capacity building workshops on DNS issues in Africa. And the thing that struck me most is all of the people that came, the local people, I saw in their eyes the commitment, the hunger, the desire to learn, to benefit from the digital economy, not only to improve their lives, but also the lives of the next generation and so on. We live in the Western world where the digital economy contribution to GDP is somewhere around 9-10%, in some countries 11-12%. You go in Africa and it's close to 0. So although they have a great internet penetration, they have 0 contribution to digital economy, and yet they have high unemployment, they have a lot of young people looking for work, and so we need to reach out, attract those people, and attract them into our model so that their voice is also heard. So that's another area. Another area of who other participants, people that don't speak English, people that do not use Latin characters. We need to reach out and attract them. One way of doing that is through IDNs. IDNs has been, a very good internationalized domain name. It's a very good initiative, and we need to continue to work on that, to continue to propagate IDN, because today we have 3 billion users probably. To reach 4-5 billion, we can't do it without IDNs, without reaching areas of the world that do not speak English. So that's my thought on it.
That's good. And we're going to turn to the audience for questions in just a minute, so get ready. But I know you wanted to talk about GTLDs and those successes and where that is going.
I really don't want to talk about GTLDs, but I will. I'm joking. So businesses want some stability, want some predictability. Everybody's saying, when is the next round? Should it be a full round? Should there be batches? Should it be just brands only? Should it be this? Should it be this? Should it be this? I think the board has made its position clear over the last 2 or 3 years, because that question keep on coming back, and it's frustrating if you are a business and you depend on or want to launch the next round and nothing is happening. So we understand this frustration. But we've made a commitment to the community that until the reviews are done and the PDP on GTLD is done, the board is going to wait for this to finish. And when the community is ready and make a recommendation to the board, I can assure you that we will move swiftly and with speed. But we are waiting for all of these to happen. So I don't want to say more than that, because putting an anchor in the ground would be wrong for me to do so at this stage.
Something we're grappling with here at CDT is the tides have turned on technology, and at least the tech industry in the United States, and it is, I keep using phrases like the bloom is off the rose, or what's really good about the internet, or there seems to be a bit of an existential question, or a little bit of making tech a punching bag after some of the issues in our election and elsewhere. How are you feeling about that dialogue? Does ICANN have a role in the larger societal conversation? And are you still optimistic that it is a force for good, that the internet will be a force for good in people's lives?
Okay, I will respond to that, but then I will probably ask my colleagues if they want to come to my rescue as well. So I'm not going to comment on the bad publicity or the publicity against tech companies. I think that's not my fault. But in terms of the future of the internet, incidentally, I'm going to be in UCLA next Monday, attending a session on that by Vint Cerf, the future of the internet. So I do not know what he's going to say, so I might say something that contradicts him, but there you go. So personally, I think that, and again, you have to think on a horizon. I can't think 20 years from now. I can only think sort of 3-5 years, that kind of planning horizon. I personally think that the internet will continue to grow. We are almost at the halfway point. If you think we have 3 million users today, I think possibly there could be 4, 5, 6 billion. Who knows? It's very difficult to predict, but the internet will grow. This is my personal view, right? But for it to grow, all of us have to play our role. We have to play our role to ensure that, first of all, the domain name system is stable and secure and operates well. That is quite important. We have to ensure that the internet, the barriers to access to the internet are removed. I mentioned IDNs, for example. We have to ensure that the system remain an egalitarian system and that there is freedom of speech. Each one of us have to play, and you guys have to play a role in that, because you promote, you advocate for people's rights, you advocate for policies, you advocate for understanding the impact of everything we do on people. So I am personally, I feel positive about the growth of the internet rather than negative. And at this point, I'm going to go to any of my colleagues who want to jump in and...
we would welcome if the board members wish to speak, and introduce yourself if you would be so kind.
Hi, I'm Sarah Deutsch, a new board member, and I just wanted to say that CDT was actually at the forefront of many of these same internet battles years ago when the internet was first introduced, and in the late 90s, and the administration came out with a green paper and said, there's this thing called the National Information Infrastructure, and it seems to be like a giant copying machine. The best policy is to hold all the service providers liable. And at that point, CDT stepped in and brokered many difficult discussions, but in many senses the technology has always been kind of ahead of the law, and it's always been also ahead of, you can't always anticipate bad uses that people are going to make of it, so I think there is a bit of a backlash there, but I think history has shown us that there's more positive than negative, and you know, we've, as a community, always been adept at working through some of these difficult problems.
Thank you for that very much.
I'm Becky Burr. I mean, I do think the bloom is off the rose. I think that the tech community is going to have to step up and take responsibility for some things that, you know, we are in a different time than we were in 1997 when the framework for global electronic commerce was. So I think there are challenges in terms of diversity, in terms of social responsibility. Fortunately, that's not our job.
Yes.
Our job is to make sure that the system operates so that all of those good things can get implemented, and that's what we're sitting at. But personally, we can all stick our heads under the desk if we want to. But the bloom is off the rose, and it's not the result of the change of administration. The bloom is off the rose across the base.
That's great. We have another board member here.
From the back, Ron Silva. I think, you know, when you think about freedoms and democracy across the globe, you know, how that is protected and guaranteed varies considerably. And I think the interesting thing about technology and how it intersects with that is just that it is exposing and potentially, you know, amplifying these discrepancies in a way that, on the legislative point and from a state's leadership standpoint, you know, they're trying to wrestle with this. What do you do now that these differences are so exposed and so obvious, and there's such a, you know, global feeling around the internet and that as a community as a whole, and that going at odds with these differences. So that I think is interesting and compelling when you combine the two.
Any other comments on that? Questions for Cherine?
Hey, no, Steve Del Bianco. Another expression is that the honeymoon's over. And that means that there's no more hands-off predisposition with respect to regulation. There are some significant implications for civil society and business. One is that we direct barriers to entry for new small companies, inventors, and innovators. If from day one they have to be able to moderate and censor every bit of speech that users put on their platform, I don't know how you can start a business that builds scale and eyeballs prior to having to assume this kind of legal obligation. That's a significant barrier to entry for tomorrow's innovator. And from the Geneva Internet Governance Forum, civil society was the largest single participant there. And in so many sessions, I heard from developing economy, civil society, a different kind of honeymoon over. Their honeymoon says, okay, Airbnb, Uber, Lyft, Amazon, eBay, we get that you give opportunities, but we want more. We want employee benefits for people that drive an Uber, right? We want all these protections for consumers and so on. So there was a real surprise at the degree to which they want to impose huge new obligations on platforms that we thought were actually empowering people to earn more money and leverage their assets and work in new ways. So the honeymoon is over, and it's got implications for business and civil society.
That's well said. I think the economic implications. Thoughts on that?
Yep.
Yes.
Thanks for being here. It's really interesting, the conversation. So one of the issues that we do a lot of work on is the Global South participation in the ICANN ecosystem. And
The global, sorry?
Global South, the rest of the world, the non-OECD countries. Okay, and you mentioned that you had been to Africa, and that there was a real hunger for this. And one of the biggest challenges that we see is that it's just not very easy for people to participate, even from the United States, let alone if you're in Kenya or Nigeria or a place that's even harder to reach in the face-to-face. And so I'm curious, what plans do you have? I know that there's not an expansion going on in the number of fellowships, but also even that model I'm not sure necessarily leads to long-term participation. What thoughts do you have about how to increase the participation of people from the Global South, and especially, frankly, businesses, because a lot of us are businesses?
I did mention that, so we do have the fellowship program and other programs as well. We also need to do some outreach and be out there and educate people. On our own, we can't do it. We can't do it. So let me tell you about 4 problems that I discovered in African countries that prohibit people from participating, right? The first problem is entrepreneurs that come up with ideas and want to build businesses on the internet. They have no access to funds. So we have the luxury here in the West, in California, and different people. You come out of university, you just walk across the street and you ask for venture capital to give you money. That concept doesn't exist there. So they can have the most brilliant idea, but they haven't got money to start something. The second thing is they don't have knowledge and expertise to start businesses, whether they become a registrar or they don't know how to do it. We are helping on that. For example, in a place like Cairo, we created an entrepreneurial center where we provide training for a lot of people on the business of registrars and registries. Right? So that's the second thing. Skills. They don't have the skills. They don't have the money. They don't have the skills. They have the idea, but they don't know what to do. The third thing is regulations. In most of these countries, the laws and the regulations are not stable. And there are a lot of retrospective legislation, so that you can start a business today based on certain rules and certain laws, and then suddenly the government comes up with a new law that stops you from doing something, and then suddenly your business model is completely disrupted. So that's the third thing. And the fourth thing is they don't have a viable and trusted payment system. They don't trust each other. So in terms of you build a business on the internet, you want to deliver something, people don't want to pay you, people are not sure if they pay you, you're going to deliver. So there's a lack of trust that was built up over a number of years. And we can do as much as we can in terms of capacity building and helping. But until governments and the private sector get together and facilitate those things. Sorry, and the fifth issue is bandwidth. You may find that bandwidth is okay in the main capitals, but across the country, there is no bandwidth at all. People cannot really conduct their business on the internet. They can do certain queries, certain lookups and things like this, but they can't run their business, and it's not reliable. With electricity shut down here, and this happening. So the infrastructure is not working as required. So it's a tall order. We can do our bit in terms of outreach and capacity building, and we could talk to the communities in terms of these issues and these problems. But unless the governments in those countries and unless the private sector put their hand together and pull together, it's going to be quite hard for people to contribute. And my name is Marilyn Cade.
My name is Marilyn Cade.
Okay.
And like many of the folks here, and Cherine, thank you for being here, and thanks to CDT for hosting. I'm just going to add a semicolon and a word after your comment about bandwidth, and there's no reliable power. But my comment is actually to focus on when you say outreach is needed. I'm going to comment on the larger internet governance ecosystem and the importance of ICANN's continued engagement there. Because to your point, we're at ICANN, we're not solving every problem, but you have an opportunity coming up to reach some of those higher level government folks at the high level GAC event in Barcelona. And one of the experiences that I have in working in not just Africa, but also in MENA and in the Caribbean is the importance of getting more than the regulator and more than the Minister of Communications engaged in understanding and participating. That doesn't mean they have to come to ICANN. Maybe they come to the IGF. But I think that means that ICANN has to be present at some of these other events, such as Davos, such as the IGF, which I know you have been, and continue to reinforce the idea that there's great interdependency for the domain name system on changes that are going on and new dependencies. So maybe if you could say a few words about how you see the awareness in the board about the continued importance in high-level engagement of ICANN in some of these larger internet governance ecosystem activities.
In fact, I'm glad you raised that question. We have a group within the board that is looking into our involvement and our strategy in Internet Governance Forum. And they presented their recommendation to the board, I can't remember when, last summer or something, and we approved it. And basically the principle behind this is that we, the board, we have to be present in those Internet Governance Fora. Why? Because thematic issues on a global basis are being discussed, and those issues could have an impact on our ability to deliver our mission. Also, our voice has to be heard as legislation, as policies, as priorities are formed around the world. If we are not present and we sort of pass our views through a third party, it's not the same, right? The other thing, of course, in those events, like you mentioned, is an opportunity to engage with ministers, with representatives from different parts of the society, and then they can hear the concerns and the issue, and we can work together. But if we're not there and if we're not present, then this is not going to happen. So we are committed to a continuous presence in Internet governance.
The question down.
Did I answer your question? Thank you.
Hi, I'm Courtney Radge. I'm with the Committee to Protect Journalists. And I was interested to hear more about the human rights assessment because I looked at the RFP and it appears that it's primarily to look at the internal practices and policies of ICANN, but to what extent will that look at policies, external policies and how it's conducting its business? Who was the firm who was chosen to do the human rights impact assessment, and how are you communicating with civil society? Because this is definitely the first time I've heard about it, but I think that's a great step forward.
Thank you. I do not know the answer to your questions. So if any of my colleagues know the answer, please respond. But I promise you one thing, that we will take your questions, we have noted them, and we will come back to you on that. Does anybody have anything to say, Duncan?
So Cherine, you did in the earlier remarks talk about the change in the bylaws and the framework of interpretation which the community is discussing, which directly addresses what you mentioned, Courtney, which is the intersection of ICANN policies and human rights issues. The internal organization's human rights impact assessment and the RFP were also identified as the community as a good interim step, as something we can do immediately right away, again to suffuse awareness of the issues throughout the organization. So part of the answer is still under development in the community, and then I don't know if the RFP closed, but
it says that
I know who was bidding on it, but
okay.
I don't want to comment on that, but I'll look it up and get you the answer.
Okay, great. And then just the second part of the question is, to what extent do you see communication with journalists and bringing journalists into the community more as a mechanism to communicate with a broader community, since everyone can't participate directly, but getting journalists to be more informed and cover more of the activities as a conduit to a more general public?
So I'm a little bit new into this job, but let me tell you that at the AGM in Abu Dhabi, I was told at the end, Cherine is a sessions journalist, right? And Joran and I went there, and it was interesting. I mean, they did ask, so there was an array of journalists, and they did ask a lot of questions. So I suspect this is, and Duncan, you can talk more about, that's one way of communicating to the outside world. He's responsible for all that.
So Duncan Burns, actually communications from ICANN. One of the challenges is with some of the challenges in newsrooms around the world, we don't really have beat reporters, for example, who follow ICANN issues. There are some obviously in DC and some in the capitals. You go to countries in Africa and it changes. People may not, they may not understand the issues. It might be, and so there's time and energy in there. There are groups that we've gone to talk to, actually, particularly in Africa, to try and educate and inform. And we have regional communications team members around the world whose job is to help educate, inform, get out, try and translate into different languages, go to events. But it is a big world. We are a relatively small organisation in terms of bringing that message. It's a really complex message. It's not the easy one to you pick up the phone to someone and they're a liberal arts major, try and explain to them what ICANN is, get their interest, and persuade them that they can then persuade their editor to get it published. It's not easy. But happy to take any tips.
We have time for probably one more. I see all the way in the back.
Thank you very much. My name is David Marara. I'm a PhD student and I study multi-stakeholder governance. I'm also a once and future ICANN fellow. I came to ICANN 58 and I'm going to ICANN 61. And I wanted to first of all thank you for your commitment to connecting to the community in a deeper level. But I also wanted to get your thoughts on the FY19 budget, because that budget has some significant cuts to, first of all, the fellowship. It cuts it by half. To the Next Gen program, to translation services, to that's coming on the heels of a potential cut to the budget of ICANN Wiki, and these seem to be, at least from my understanding, from the understanding of sort of new people within the ICANN community, sort of my fellow fellows, let's say, that these things are crucial for connecting with the youth, connecting with people in the global south, connecting with people that can't be there, that don't speak English, and I wanted to sort of get your opinion on that.
It's a difficult question to answer because the budget has not been finalized yet. So what has happened over the past few years is that ICANN funding that we receive from our contracted parties had grown up almost exponentially, right? I remember when I joined in 2010, I think we were talking about something in the order, I can't remember, Peter, you were chairman there. In the order
About 70 million.
70 million. Today is 135 or 40 million. It's doubled. And during that period of growth, I don't think we were, we controlled our expenses necessarily. And because the organization were going through a transformation, particularly through the transition, where we spent something in the order of 36 million on that. Plus, we expanded to be present in certain countries. We introduced the fellowship program. We introduced the other program, and so on and so forth. And the aim was to continue almost to match the funding with continuing expenses, on the basis that we want a balanced budget at the end of the year. And yes, we're not for profit, but also not for loss. Now that growth has reached a point of stability, right? So we see the curve that went like this to now flatten out. Expenses, unfortunately, do continue to grow because there's inflation, there's salaries, there's rent, there's all of these things that continue to grow. So we have to make some hard choices and we have to make trade-offs. And I think what Joran has done is present a budget to the committee. I said it's not going to be easy, it's going to be tough. There are important trade-offs and important decisions, and I know exactly where you're coming from. So it is important, that's why I said earlier on, it is important that we all make a contribution to the comments. It's been posted for public comments. It is online. You can submit your, please make your voices heard. Because at the end of the day, it's going to be, you would appreciate that we cannot continue to spend more than we have, right? And it's very hard to focus on one area and say that area is going to suffer at the expense of something else. It's got to be a balance, and everybody has to in a way, participate, including the board, right? Including we, the board. So, for example, we're looking at cutting down about the support we're getting from IT. We have 6 workshops a year, 3 as part of the public. We're thinking of reducing one of those, so that eliminates quite a lot of expenses. So the travel policy, we've introduced a travel policy for the board, which is very clear, so that we managed to book flights early and save a lot of money in that regard. So we have to make a contribution as well, and everybody has to be. It's when you talk about money, it's one of the most emotional subjects, and that brings in a lot of feelings in a lot of people. So I do respect the point you have made. I do not have an answer until we see the comments coming in. Becky.
I just wanted to suggest, I believe, and Ron may know the answer to this, that there's been actually quite a lot of analysis about, what percentage of the fellows come to a second event, become participating members of the community. How do we make the program do that? So some of this is focused on how do we make those programs more effective. And I think with some of the translation services, they can tell at a meeting who uses what translation. And there are some of them that are not used at all. So I think that information is available in the budget presentation, and if it's not, we should probably ask about it, because those are all critically important things. But I can tell you that the ICANN organization has been looking at those cuts with respect to how do we use our dollars most effectively for engagement.
Just as a quick response to that, I think that at least for the translation services, that feels like a bit of a vicious cycle. Because if you don't offer, let's say, Portuguese, right? I'm assuming Portuguese is used, but if you don't offer a particular language, then somebody that may not have funding to travel to more than one internet governance meeting a year says, well, I'm not going to go there, I'm going to go to an IGF because they're not catering to me. And at the same for the fellowships, I have to say that as a fellow, most of the fellows that do have the opportunity to travel with the fellowship don't necessarily have other means to get there to an ICANN meeting, so that it might be because it's financially restrictive, other than simply taking the fellowship as a nice vacation somewhere and pretending to listen to.
Yeah, I wasn't suggesting that. I'm talking about in terms of becoming connected to the ICANN community and participating in it and stuff. I'm not just talking about how many meetings. I don't want to get into the weeds. All I'm suggesting is that that the critical question is, are we using these dollars effectively to support real engagement? I think we're all on the same page, but I think that's the question.
I think to add that, so I'm the new chair of the Finance Committee. The Finance Committee is there to help the CEO and the CFO ensure that the budgeting process is followed. What I think Cherine was trying to stress is the way the organization prioritizes its activities and thus its costs is a community-based process. And if we take the sum of all the interests and demands and projects and programs that are coming out of the community, it's higher, greater than what our expected revenues are. So there's got to be some real assessments around which programs, which projects do we prioritize, and they all have value. I think everybody I've talked to, they see the value in the fellowship program, and some of the stuff that Becky's talking about, trying to quantify that value is I think a step in the right direction and maybe even stronger and better. But the problem is we have too many of these programs, not the fellowship program, but we have too many activities across the entire community. If we can find a way to do them for less, or we have to do less of them in order to maintain a balanced budget. So that's really the challenge that we have in front of us.
This is a terrific conversation, but we are at the top of the hour, and so what I want to suggest is that we take it around the corner to our kitchen, have a glass of wine, continue the conversation, but I wanted to ask Cherine if you had any very quick closing thoughts for us or what wishes?
Well, to say thank you, and we're glad you raised all these issues. We're listening, we're here to learn and listen and engage with you, so Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you
Appreciate
for being
it.
here, and thank you all for joining us.